You're welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Well, President Bola Tinubu has just stepped off a busy itinerary after last week's visit to Beijing, China, to attend the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation Summit. A good number of other heads of state from Africa also attended the meetings with Chinese officials led by President Xi Jinping. It was feel-good all round as the host country sought to consolidate on a recent Africa charm offensive by pledging $50.7 billion in credit lines and investments. How good is Nigeria looking for a slice of what's coming from China? We're now being joined for a conversation by Dr. Muda Yusuf, the founder and CEO of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise and a former Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Good morning to you and happy Sunday. It's always good to have you on the morning show. Good to have you join us. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve. Good morning. Fine, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you indeed. All right, let's dive straight into it. Our president was in China, and he described his visit as very successful. And I was just sharing thoughts with my co-host Adesua that we have always gone to China. Our presidents, like to go to China. Since 1999, all the presidents that we have had have been there on a state visit, for other reasons. President Obasanjo was there twice. The late Yar'Adua was there once. President Goodluck Jonathan in 2013 was there. President Buhari was there twice. And now President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in his second year is also now in China. And he says that it was successful. What are your thoughts regarding this specific visit by Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu to China and the promise of $50.7 billion in credit lines to African countries that Nigeria is expected to benefit from? Is it about is this what visiting China is all about to you?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and good morning to you, and good morning to Adesua. Well, I think it's a question of consolidating relationship. The relationship between China and African countries has been quite deep. And of course, between China and Nigeria at bilateral level has also been quite deep. And if you look at even some of the benefits so far, you see that in terms of bilateral relationships and in terms of the impact of such relationships on economic development, I think we have seen a very significant impact of the relationship with China or Nigeria, particularly with respect to infrastructure. The biggest ports we have today is the Lekki Deep Sea Port. It's a product of this relationship. We have seen quite a number of footprints in railway infrastructure, in our airports, in our hydroelectricity projects, in road projects, and so on. So the beauty of the relationship with China is that their intervention or the benefits of those relations comes in terms of investment, concrete investment, not so much in terms of cash that are vulnerable to being abused or being diverted elsewhere. They come in form of solid infrastructure. So from that point of view, I think visiting China is something that is worthwhile, at least to consolidate that relationship. And of course, the Chinese president has offered a lot more assistance and all of that. But it is for us to also be able to take advantage of more, especially in the area of trade. Now, trade between Nigeria and China, for instance, in 2023 was about $22.6 billion. Over 95% of that was imports. Imports from China. We are not really exporting anything tangible. And now President Xi Jinping has said, well, they are opening their borders to export from Africa at 0% duty. But you can only export what you have. You can only export what is competitive. So we have a lot of work to do internally to be able to take or to be able to optimize these benefits that are opening up as a result of this relationship. But so far, I think our relationship with China has been very, very beneficial.
Okay, sir, thank you for joining us this morning. Now, beyond just Nigeria, China is opening up this credit line to a lot of African countries. And loans from Chinese and these type of loans have been criticized as being bad loans due to high debt burden. But also critically, we have in Namibia, Zambia, Kenya, and Djibouti, countries that are heavily indebted to China, a possibility that they might lose critical national assets. In Zambia, it was rumored that the National Electricity Company, there will be ZESCO, their version of PHTN, can be owned by China. In Sri Lanka, China has taken over a port due to a lack of payment of debts. And we've seen even in Nigeria with the issue in Ogun State and a Chinese company leading to the Nigerian presidential jet being seized due to lack of repayment out of a judgment. So do you believe that we are at risk of losing some of our assets, that the lack of transparency on what the collateral for these loans or these products or these credit lines are, if it's not transparent, do you think we are at risk of losing some of our national assets if our credit lines or our loan performance is bad?
Well, the issue of credit lines and seizure of assets and things like that, I think these issues are questions of the capacity of each country to effectively protect its interest. Now, if you are taking facility, I mean, first, the contractual terms has to be something that is, very protective of the interests of the countries. Nobody is compelling anybody to take any debt. These are sovereign countries. I mean, the Chinese government cannot impose anything on any country. So if you are going into any contract or taking any particular facility on voluntary basis, it is for each country to also put its house in order. If you do not put your house in order and you fall into you express some challenges, you can't blame the Chinese for that. So I think it's a question of the quality of leadership across many countries on the continent, the capacity of the bureaucracy and possibly the political class to ensure that they craft whatever agreements or whatever facility they are taking, the conditions around those facilities. You craft it sufficiently enough to protect your interest. I mean, you have cited the example. Most of those facilities were actually invested in infrastructure. How are they managing their economy? What kind of value is the infrastructure bringing to them? These are domestic governance issues. I think it is more of domestic governance issues than that of, of external issues. In Nigeria, for instance, our total external debt as at 31st of March, according to DMO, is about $42 billion US. The bilateral component of that debt is about $5.9 billion. The Chinese component is $5 billion. So the total bilateral debt compared to total debt is just about 13%. The bigger debt we have is the multilateral debt. It's about 20 billion. That's just owed to World Bank, IMF, and the rest of them. Then we have the Euro bond, which is commercial debt. That's about maybe 35%. So bilateral debt in Nigeria is not such a big issue. And the beauty of it is that it is expended directly on infrastructure. The only challenge with some of those projects is that, they bring all sorts of people from China. They bring practically everything from China to execute those projects. But you can see those projects. As against what you take as against what you have when you go and take all these commercial loans, you throw it into the budget and the thing fizzles out. You don't see what you have spent the money for. So for me, I think it's a question of the individual countries putting their houses in order, ensuring that whatever agreement they are going into, agreement that are sustainable, an agreement that also effectively protects their interests. That is the way I see it.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, that's clear enough. But I'd like you I'd like to draw your attention to another part of the visit of the president to China, particularly when he met with the Nigerian diaspora there, and he spoke to them about the need for him to continue to take tough decisions so that Nigeria can, infrastructurally speaking, become like China. I would like you to address what the president meant and what that symbolizes for many Nigerians who are complaining at this point. But in doing that, I would like you to put it in the context of the radical, but I believe fundamental ideas that you have as to how Nigeria can begin to recalibrate, particularly in the area, the propositions you have about cutting the federal budget, by about 50%, and then reducing the dollar benchmark on oil. Those are radical but fundamental thoughts. I would like you to, so therefore, put in context the things that the president believes that he should do at this point in time, and then what you are proposing, so that Nigerians we won't reach a breaking point that nobody will be able to cope anymore.
Well, I believe what the president was alluding to was the package of economic reforms that have been put in place since the inception of this administration. Of course, the reforms have been challenging, both for the government and for the people. But again, the reforms were corrective reforms. But again, we need to ensure that in reforming an economy, we manage it in a way that the shocks on the citizens are not too much, does not become unbearable. Because the dysfunctionalities in the economy are things that have been a cumulative thing. These are things that have been accumulating over the years. And in trying to correct it, we cannot correct it with the kind of speed that we are going. Otherwise, we'll be leaving too many people behind, which is the challenge we are facing today. Because what is clear from some of these reforms is that the social cost of the reform is extremely very high. And no two economies are the same. The authors of some of these reform packages are coming from jurisdictions that have very good safety nets, where it is easier for the citizens to cope with the outcomes of those reforms. But in many parts of Africa, Nigeria inclusive, we don't have that kind of social safety net. So that is why we need to reckon with the peculiarities of our environment. I know that there's a limit to which government can continue to carry on subsidy. I know that there's a limit to which we can continue to, directly interfere in the market system, in the foreign exchange market. But in order to make reforms sustainable, in order to make the process inclusive, and in order to also ensure that we carry people along, we don't leave too many people behind, we need to continually review the reforms in the light of experiences, in the light of the context in which these reforms are being implemented. So there's a need for some kind of gradualism. We need to move slowly and gradually. Because at the end of the day, the economy is about human beings. And we need to ensure that at least it is the living that will enjoy the benefits of the reforms. Because when I hear people in NNPC talk about market prices, the system is already deregulated, they talk about PIA, in principle that is okay. But we need to give these things a human face. We need to bring a social content into economic policy. We are not seeing much of that social content. And I'm not referring here to, just all these palliatives that people are distributing. No. I'm talking about something that will be more systemic. So that is why I feel that the reforms in themselves are very good in principle, but the implementation has to be done in a way that the shocks on the citizens will not be too much, especially because we have very weak social safety nets. Take the issue of transportation. In many of these countries that we seem to emulate and talk about the way they are managing their economy, market-driven and all of that, they have massive investment, public investment in public transportation. So that even when energy prices are rising, the shock on the ordinary people, on the vulnerable segment, is not much. Because the public transportation is heavily subsidized. But it's not the same thing here. Over 95% of our public transportation is provided by the private sector. And the private sector doesn't give you social consideration. The private sector is there for profit. So whether you are a messenger or you are a manager, once you enter a downfall bus, all of you are paying the same thing. And what cost increases, sometimes they even take advantage of the citizens. And the only way to moderate that is to ensure that we have massive investment in public transportation. And we can also use policies to boost the supply side of transportation so that more private investors can also invest in public transportation. For instance, the government can say within the context of all these packages of relief and palliative that any passenger vehicle that is 18-seater and above, you scrap the import duty on them. You scrap the VAT on them. So that more people, more offices, more companies, more governments can buy these buses and put it on the road. That will bring a lot of relief to people. This is a private sector channel that can help to cushion the effect. But you need policy incentives to be able to drive that. It's not a question of government buying, we bought 10 buses, we bought 100, but this is a very big country. We have a population of over 200 million people. And the country is very vast. So we need to deploy policies that can incentivize private sector involvement in this. The government also needs to invest directly in issues of public transport. The same thing applies to energy.
So if we're going to
energy. Now we have this energy issue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, because you're going directly in the area that I actually want to ask you a question about, because we're talking about energy, but particularly I'm talking about PMS and the Dangote refinery. Is there anything that you believe the government should be doing, because we're talking about ease, we're talking about beyond the economics of a subsidy, beyond the economics of floating the naira, in order to help the Nigerian people? When it comes to the Dangote refinery, do you believe that it is going to be a relief on our pockets? Do you believe that there's anything that the government can do to make sure that it is a relief on our pockets? Or do you believe that this is just a private enterprise owned by one man that is just there to make profit?
No, you see, the government, there's a political economy dimension to economic management. Everything is not about straight economics. Because this is social science. Social science is a science of people. It's a science of human behavior. It's about people. It's not a physical science. So policies have to be socially sensitive. Now, we cannot leave energy situation entirely to private sector because of its implications for the social lives and the welfare of the people. We cannot. If you want to exit from it into a pure market, it has to be a gradual process. I mean, look at the experience we had in the last 1 or 2 weeks with energy prices. There's no way we can walk away so quickly from this subsidy. It's not socially feasible. It's not even politically feasible or advisable. You can't walk away so easily. But the fact that you now have a Dangote refinery means that you can localize some of those transactions. If you localize the transactions, the burden on the government will be much less. The burden on our foreign reserves will be much less. The impact on our exchange rate will be much less. The macroeconomic conditions will also improve. So that is why I'm worried that the NNPC doesn't seem to be so excited about this Dangote refinery for whatever reason. But this should be a nationalistic thing. This is about economic nationalism. Whatever we need to do to support the refinery, to patronize the refinery. We have been told now that Dangote said the products are ready for off-taking. And as we are speaking now, I think the NNPC is still importing. I think we need to see more enthusiasm about encouraging domestic production. So that when we have this patronage of the Dangote refinery, and indeed other domestic refineries, you are able to ensure that you conserve foreign exchange. You are able to ensure that you create more jobs. You are able to ensure that even beyond PMS, you have other byproducts. You have the petrochemicals that you come from this. You have a lot of raw materials that industries, manufacturers are importing now. All of these things will ease the pressure on our foreign exchange market, because at the heart of most of these problems we are having today in the country, it's about forex, it's about exchange rates. Because the economy is highly sensitive to developments in the foreign exchange markets. And you cannot have a better window to exit from this challenge than what we are having with these Dangote refineries and other refineries. So we need to see the NNPC show more enthusiasm about supporting and patronizing domestic refineries. I was reading a statement by the corporate affairs manager of NNPC saying that Dangote can sell to anybody and all of that. You cannot just throw energy prices to the market like that. How do you want the citizens to cope with that? In an economy where you don't have much support in terms of alternatives. So we need to continue to manage this situation until we get to a point where some of these things will be able to ease completely. Until we get to a situation where a lot of our citizens will be able to transit from the use of this fossil fuel to other sources of energy. And I'm also say at this point that some of the policies that have been announced by government, the bureaucracy and those in charge should please also help this administration. When policies are announced, let them implement it expeditiously. In June this year, the president announced import duty waiver on pharmaceutical products. This is September. It is yet to be implemented. What is the problem? You know what the cost of medical equipment, medication is for the citizens? You know what they are going through? The bureaucracy doesn't seem to appreciate the urgency of this matter. In July, there was an announcement that food imports, some categories of food imports will enjoy import duty waiver. This is September. I spoke to some operators in the sector. They said that the processes are still being moved from either finance to agric and all of that. This is September. And these policies arose as a result of the urgency of the moment to ease the pains of the citizens. But the bureaucracy are not in a hurry. So we need to ensure that we shorten the implementation lag of policy and we reduce the bureaucracy. Last year, the president announced that CNG equipment, buses, electric cars will enjoy zero import duty. Now, when you see the guidelines, for you to import an electric car or a CNG vehicle, you have to get approval from the Office of the Special Advisor of Energy. You have to get approval from the Ministry of Finance on import duty to get an import duty certificate. before you now go to customs. Even if you are importing just one CNG vehicle.
Yeah.
I was speaking to one of the private investors in the automobile sector. They imported just one truck, CNG. And in the process of getting all these certification approvals, it took them almost 2 months.
A lot of bottlenecks.
They had to go and pay import duty.
Yes, sir. You've highlighted a lot of the bottlenecks.
11 million import duty.
Yes, sir.
You know?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us this morning and providing us insight on these topics. Thank you very much, sir.